I haven't thought
Nathaniel,
about
is
it
it
well enough.
possible for God to lie?
It's not that he can't. It's just that it's not in his nature to do so.
Brother, we get it. We get it. So by nature, he can't lie.
He can. It's just not in. It's not in his nature to do so.
Oh my God. Can, that means there's a possible world where he could do it.
Okay. Can you explain to me what does this have to do with Jesus not being God? I'm sorry.
Nathaniel,
Go ahead.
you just said that God can't lie. Is that right?
Okay. Yes.
Is Jesus truly man in every sense?
Yes. But here's
Beautiful.
the thing.
If he's truly man in every sense, then it is a necessary condition for a man to be able to lie. Was Jesus able to lie?
And that right there is the trap of this argument. It's pressing questions without clarity, leading someone to conclusions, or at least leading someone to answer those questions while keeping your argument concealed. And that's what Libyano's good at. He's good at packaging and concealing arguments. You'll see what I mean.
Option one, humans by nature can lie, which means any human has the ability to lie. Or option two, humans by nature cannot lie.
This is where I would say the argument is being revealed for what it is. We could break this up into a syllogism so far. We've got the first premise, which is that God cannot lie. Premise B, a human must necessarily be able to lie. The way that he forced the Christian into choosing one of the two options was by presenting a false dichotomy. A human must either, or for someone to be a man, they must either have the ability to lie or not have the ability to lie. Now, must is going to refer to necessity. He's saying it's a must. It must be one of two options.
Jesus
Correct.
wasn't, it's either he was able, so Nathaniel, understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying Jesus lied, okay? He didn't lie, sure. But just because he didn't lie, it doesn't mean that he couldn't lie. So I'm asking you, in order for you to be a man, is it a necessary condition for you to have the ability to lie?
Let's visit the premises again. Premise A, God cannot lie, cannot lie. Premise B, humans must be able to lie. Premise C, Jesus was fully man. Therefore, obviously, the conclusion, by making you agree to certain things beforehand, is trying to get to the conclusion that if humans can lie and God can't lie, then if Jesus is fully man, he cannot be God. Right? That's the conclusion. That would be the premise A, premise B, premise C conclusion structure of this argument.
In Jesus' humanity, can he lie?
Am I going to be forced into a yes or no question, or can I freely give you an answer?
There are questions that the Christian is being pressed to answer by the way that this is packaged with logical fallacies. Sentences being reframed to mean what the Christian hasn't actually said they mean.
Am I going to be forced into a yes or no question, or can I freely give you an answer? Am I forced into a yes or no question, or can I freely give you an answer?
You can qualify, but yeah, say yes or no.
Can I give you a free answer?
Yeah, say yes or no, then qualify.
I'm not going to be forced into a yes or no. Can I answer
It's a straight
freely?
dichotomy. It's either
Okay, I'm going to answer freely.
And that's it, right there. Right there. That's what this argument hinges on. When Libyano says it's a true dichotomy and forces the answer, right, so that his premises can stand. Premise A, God cannot lie. Premise B, humans must necessarily be able to lie, right? Premise C, Jesus was fully human. Therefore, Jesus must be able to lie, but God cannot lie, right? Premise C hinges on premise B, and premise B is presented as a metaphysical truth. You choosing to commit to a specific metaphysical truth about humanity, that humans must necessarily be able to lie or not be able to lie. The ability to lie, right, is not intrinsic to humanity. If it were a necessity and essential to humanity to have the ability to lie, then that would mean that a baby is not a human until the baby lies. And it would mean that if a human being went into a coma, that they are no longer human because a coma patient does not have the ability to lie. This is the conflation and the assumption that Libyano smuggles in to the premises and therefore can push the Christian to answer the question certain ways. Lying depends on conditions. Lying depends on X. the knowledge and awareness of a relational target. In other words, you have to cognitively be aware of another being, condition Y, that you can deliver information that is not true, condition Z, that you can convey false information to a relational target to achieve a certain outcome, which is deceit for your own benefit. That's usually what lying is. But because lying is contingent on the X, Y, and Z conditions, anything that is contingent on those things, right? Coma patient can't deceive a relational target, and a baby doesn't have the cognitive abilities to deceive a relational target to achieve a certain outcome. But the fact that those are contingent, the ability to lie is contingent on those conditions, means that if lying is contingent, then lying cannot have any necessity or metaphysical bearing on what makes a human being a human being. Therefore, lying cannot be intrinsically necessary to our being. Therefore, Libyano can't say for a man to be a man, they must necessarily be able to lie or not lie. The ability to lie or not lie doesn't determine anything for us within our humanity. So for Jesus to be fully man doesn't actually follow. It does not follow that he needs to be able to lie. It's just that Libyano is relying on an intuition. He's using intuitive reasoning, not logical reasoning. He's using an intuition that tells us, well, typically humans can lie, so I can't say the human must necessarily lack the ability to lie, because intuitively we typically experience that virtually every human being can lie. But that doesn't mean we have to pick the other option. There's an option C. It's a false dichotomy. We can say that lying is contingent. Now, he goes and qualifies that yes, Jesus never lied. Jesus did not lie. But we are not saying he did lie. We are saying he must have had the ability to lie. And then even if he chose not to, he had the ability, which would still disqualify him as God. That's Libyano's argument at the end of the day. But that also assumes that Jesus is fallen, that Jesus has a predisposition to sin, which in the Christian paradigm he does not. Jesus is said to be the exact image and the representation of God's nature. And if God by nature cannot lie, why should we expect that Jesus, if he is the exact representation of the nature of God, should have the ability to lie? Jesus is called the second Adam, the one who's the life-giving spirit after the first Adam. But according to the Bible, both Adams are perfect and uncorrupt in their nature. It just so happens that the first Adam, although not having the predisposition for sin, for lying, so forth and so forth, is deceived and brought into sin. And that's what accounts for the fallen nature of the rest of mankind, where we have the predisposition for sin. But if Jesus is the second Adam and comes with a perfect, unbroken human nature, he's still human without having the potential for sin or for lying. But not just that. If the second Adam is called the life-giving spirit, then why should we expect that the second Adam, who's the life-giving spirit, would even have the potential to bring about acts that cause death? For the price and the wages of sin is death. Why would the life-giving spirit have the potential to bring about death if its nature is to bring about life? Biblically, we don't even have the grounds to assume that Jesus had the potential to sin based on those verses alone. So there are just too many assumptions, too many smuggled in presuppositions that require premise B and C to be assumed as metaphysical truths and as biblical truths and as theological truths, when in fact they are not. And if premise C is not true, then the conclusion that Jesus is God doesn't hold, it doesn't follow. If premise B, that humans must necessarily lie, doesn't hold, then premise C can't possibly follow from premise B that Jesus had to have been able to lie. Wipe away premise B, wipe away premise C. What does this argument have? Nothing. It does not disprove that Jesus is not God. Here's the point. And I do think that Nathaniel the Christian, who was in this conversation with Libyano, handled himself well. It was just that he unfortunately was on a panel where this argument was being concealed, and he was being hit with fallacious claims designed to force him to accept or answer questions before fully understanding what the argument was. The takeaway here is investigate arguments. There's nothing wrong in apologetics with investigating an argument, no matter how much you are rushed. If someone does not want to If someone does not disclose their argument and they conceal it and instead first try to get you to agree to X, Y, or Z, that's usually going to land up being a bait and switch or a false dichotomy waiting there somewhere. Even if you did fall for it, there's no reason for you to then backtrack as much as they press you. Do not just go with it. Backtrack. Syllogize. Take it point by point. Show why things don't follow. Bring in analogies like I did with the baby, the coma patient, the Adam, the biblical evidence for why Jesus, being the exact representation of God's nature, would then suggest the opposite of Jesus necessarily having the potential for sin. Those things can help to break assumed premises. So I hope this helped. I hope this helped you to learn something about arguments like this, cleverly designed. Libyano is good at packaging arguments. He's good at concealing arguments. He's good at intuitive reasoning. That doesn't mean that he's actually going to give good logical arguments.